Good.
Doubling up. Roger roll with planet. Flight downside of speed off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the season finale, if you will, of NASA Spaceflight Live. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Thomas Burghardt. I'm an editor and reporter for NASASpaceflight.com, and I'm joined by two familiar faces to the NSF Live crew, Chris Gebhardt, Assistant Managing Editor for NASA Spaceflight. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. How about yourself, Thomas?
I'm doing great. Glad to see you back from Kennedy Space Center this morning. Know you were out there covering the NROL-108 launch this morning, which went off without a hitch. Glad to see you back. And from the West Coast, Jack Beyer, photographer for NASA Spaceflight, video editor, commentator, whatever you want. Man of many hats. Jack, how are you?
I mean, I'm a bald guy. I need hats. I'm doing good.
And we are also joined in the background by Mr. Michael Baylor, live stream producer. Michael, how you doing? Michael is muted. There he is. Up, never mind. All right, you can't hear Michael. I apologize, but he's here and he'll be helping us out as well. But thank you all for joining us. We know that the channel grew quite a bit, especially with the recent Starship news, and so this is kind of the first full-up NSF Live episode we've done since Starship SN9 flew. Last week we did kind of a different version because we already had a Starship stream up, so we just kind of rolled it into that thing. But this is the fully normal, if you will, NSF Live news show where we wrap up this week in spaceflight news, and there's a ton to talk about. We got 7 different launches to recap. We've got plenty of Starship news to talk about and plenty of other stuff. So we're going to hop right into it, and we're going to start with a recap of the launches this week. First and foremost, out of Russia, the Angara A5 test flight. Chris, you want to talk a little bit about the significance of that mission?
There we go. How about now?
There we go. We got Chris muted. Hold on. Now, Chris, would you like to tell us about Angara A5?
Thank you. So this was one of the, this was a really important test flight to come out of Russia this year, and specifically this week. The Angara A5 rocket, part of the overall Angara rocket family, took its second test flight. It had been about 5 years, 5 or 6 years between the first Angara A5 and the second one. But this test flight was highly successful. It put a mass simulator into the targeted orbit. All elements of the vehicle worked as designed, including the 5 universal rocket motors, or URM, stages, each of them powered by a single RD-191 engine. All of those stages worked perfectly, including the separation sequences of the side cores, the throttle down and throttle up of the center core to conserve propellant, and then onward to the Universal Rocket Motor 2. Second stage of the vehicle, and then finally the Brisem upper stage, which is not new, did its job in getting that mass simulator up into the targeted orbit. This was the final of the test launches of this particular, or hopefully the final of the test launches of this particular one. Shortly after its liftoff, Dmitry Rogozin announced 2 flights of the Angara next year, as well as continued development of some of the other variants of the vehicle, including the Angara 1, which would just fly with the single URM core, the Angara 3, which would have 2 instead of 4 URM strapped onto the side for boosters. And it's still out there that one of the things they're going to be developing with their new crew capsule is that will launch on the Angara 5, and actually will not use an upper stage on that one. Will just be the central core and the 4 side-mounted boosters, and will actually be able to drop off that spacecraft into a slightly suborbital trajectory. So just like Starliner does it right now, where it's delivered into a slightly suborbital trajectory, and then the capsule and service module itself would then raise the orbit up after that. So a really important test flight, the Angara. is one of the rockets in development right now, the Soyuz 5, which is one of its names being the other one, which are really designed to sort of form and streamline a lot of Russian launch operations into just the modular Soyuz design and the modular Angara design as well. And its launch pad is also launched from the Plesetsk Cosmodrome in northwestern Russia. But it's also got another launch pad under construction for commercial missions and civilian missions, as well as crew missions from the Vostochny Cosmodrome in eastern Russia, where another Russian mission, European mission, launched from earlier this week, which we'll get to a bit later. But big, important test flight that was successful. So onward and upward for the Angara family.
And as always with the NASA Spaceflight streams, we want to welcome any questions you may have about anything we're talking about. And in that spirit, I would have one question here about Angara. What fuel is used by Russia for the Angara A5 vehicle?
Yeah, excellent question. So the universal rocket motors all sorry, the universal rocket motors all burn RP1 kerosene and liquid oxygen, just like the Soyuz does and the Falcon 9 does as well. And then the upper stage, the URM2, also burns RP1 kerosene and liquid oxygen. And then the third stage right now, which is using the BRISM, burns nitrogen tetroxide and unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine. But the third stage that is under development that Angara will eventually transition to, called the KVTK stage, would use liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen for it.
There we go. And of course, also, as always, with all of these streams, we also want to thank people who are supporting the stream with their memberships and things like that. So Wayne with a new membership, thank you so much for joining up. Jacob with a super chat saying Merry Christmas to you as well. Happy holidays to everyone. And Moldy Space Industries, a regular in the stream. Here's to being done with finals and the Thomas fan club. Thank you so much for your support. We appreciate it.
It wouldn't be a live stream without the Thomas fan club.
Apparently not. Thank you so much. Moving right along, we got tons of launches to go through, so I'm going to go to the next one, which was out of New Zealand. We had a launch on Rocket Lab closing out their 2020 campaign, a mission name for the ages, The Owl's Night Begins, a satellite for the Japanese company is it Synspective? Synspective, thank you. So a single satellite on board. But Rocket Lab's newest launch. There was no recovery effort on this flight. Of course, if the mission before this, Return to Sensor, was Rocket Lab's first Stage 1 recovery effort with a successful splashdown, a huge step forward for that program. But they're still working on data review and all of that stuff. So this was a normal expendable Rocket Lab Electron rocket launch, but went off without a hitch as well. And Rocket Lab closes out a fairly successful year. Despite a launch failure earlier in the year, they had rebounded from that, resumed other launch campaigns. They had that first Stage 1 recovery effort, and next year they're looking to debut out of the Wallops flight facility their second launch pad, so as well as new recovery efforts as well. So Rocket Lab closing out their year successfully and looking forward to a brighter 2021 as well. So there was another successful launch this week. Also in the American-based small sat market, we have a huge bit of news out of Alaska, Kodiak, Alaska, where Astra Space did not quite reach orbit on their first or on their second orbital launch attempt, but they got really close and they did make it to space. This is huge news for that company, whose first flight didn't get quite far off the pad, just crashed off the shore of their launch pad in Kodiak. But this second flight went so much better. First stage flight went perfectly, got all the way to stage separation and stage 2 ignition, shut down just 3 seconds or so before reaching that orbital velocity they needed, got to the right altitude, had good control the entire way, and sent that simulated payload deploy signal. Even though there was no payload on board, but they got so close that the next flight should have a payload on board, paying customer. Some small changes to the fuel mixture on the upper stage is all it's going to take, and Astra well on their way to being the newest privately funded company to reach low Earth orbit. Chris, talk about the significance of another small sat rocket reaching orbit for the first time potentially next year.
Yeah, I mean, man, first, I just want to say, man, I mean, like, your second stage engine shutting down 3 seconds early. They were so close. 500 meters per second is all they were short by. So close. And this really surpassed a lot of expectations because Rocket Lab was saying that their goal was to make it to orbit by flight number 3. So flight number 1 barely made it off the pad, and flight number 2 almost made it to orbit. So all signs point toward that progression coming true. That on flight number 3 they'll reach orbit. But largely the significance here, right? If you look at the small satellite market and you look at what Rocket Lab has really been able to do and
Astra,
show
you
us,
mean?
and
Yeah.
nope, nope,
Well, Rocket
nope.
Lab as well, right?
Yep, that's where. Yep, what I was saying.
Sorry.
What? Yeah, no. What Rocket Lab has shown us over these last years is the incredibly high demand for these dedicated small satellite launchers and missions, because without them, these small payloads end up having to wait and kind of go along for the ride with larger satellites. On bigger rockets like the Atlas or the Falcon or the Soyuz or the Ariane. But by doing these dedicated missions, the satellites can actually go to the most efficient orbit that they need to get into. Whereas when they ride along as ride shares with larger payloads, they're at the mercy of where the larger customer is going, and maybe that's not optimal for them. So the fact that Rocket Lab showed us the demand for that, and then that Astra participated in the DARPA challenge with the U.S. government, specifically giving a lot of potential funding there, and funding for the milestones that they did reach. It just highlights the growing demand for that particular industry. And shortly after this flight, Astra announced a slew of launches as well that they already have contracted from the small satellite market, and as well as being recognized for potential launch services in the future for the U.S. government as well. So a big day for that.
And I want to point out these stunning launch photos from our friend John Krause, who was up there photographing for Astra. And this launch site, I'm going to zoom out a little bit, but this launch site is gorgeous out in Kodiak, Alaska. Jack, we going to get you out to Kodiak or something like that? Would you want to shoot
Yeah,
a launch from up there?
yeah, I would absolutely love to do so. I've been meaning to do a nice Canada northern continent sort of excursions at some point. So sign me up. I'd be down. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, as you say, Chris, to see more small sat launchers come online, with the demand having been proven by Rocket Lab that if you can get it into a specific orbit and not have to ride along, it's a much more interesting proposition for some of these companies. I do wonder, like, how many small sat launchers can the market, how many small sat launchers is there demand for? Because there's a lot of small sat launchers, right? I mean, I'm thinking about Virgin Orbit right at the top of
Mm-hmm.
my head, who's they're about to do their second flight now, right, kind of on the heels of Astra's. Although I guess that's Virgin Orbit's been delayed a little bit due to COVID concerns, but yeah, I mean, how many small sat launchers can there be? And especially with Rocket Lab absolutely crushing it. Rocket Lab getting to a point now
Mm-hmm.
where they're starting to do reusability stuff. So it's the race is on if you're a small sat launcher, and Astra seems to
Yeah.
be in the, heading out in the front of the pack. Luckily, you want to be launching now. You don't want to be waiting
Yeah.
if I'm a
No,
small sat launcher.
yeah, exactly. And even from the small sat perspective, the complexity of the systems that are being designed, right, are no different than the larger orbital class rockets, right, that can throw the gigantic satellites outward to geostationary orbit, like we've seen a lot this month. This is just as complex and technical, and not every company that's vied for this is still around. Vector Space was one of the ones that a lot of people were watching, because of their mobile agility, and just
Yep.
trucking these things out to any launch site and not needing an actual launch range or facility. But they couldn't do it in the end, and they kind of still exist, but not really. So it's difficult and demanding. And your point is well taken, Jack, because I think, I don't know, I think that's a huge part of the unknown of this equation, is exactly how many launchers can be sustained. I can definitely see from the US government's perspective, because the DoD and the NRO are really interested in these small satellites, and these small sat launchers. I could see from a US government perspective having 3 of them in Rocket Lab, Astra, and Virgin Orbit being enough, right, to satisfy the various mission classes that you could want and sizes of your payloads, and have redundancy in your system in case one system goes down for a few months.
Yeah, and I think kind of in that same vein, it makes sense in a lot of ways that, as we'll get to talking about Stratolaunch a little later, they have sort of pivoted away from orbital services to hypersonic research, which, yeah, I mean, if you see the market is being very well served, then pivot and do something else.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have some questions here about Astra. David with a super chat. Thank you so much. What type of orbits is Astra targeting up to GTO? I don't think there's much room for a small sat launcher, at least not one the size of Astra's, to go all the way to GTO. Chris or Jack, any word on that, or are they mainly sticking to sun synchronous and low Earth orbits? I know they're targeting or pursuing a closer to the equator launch site so they can go to some lower inclination, low Earth orbits, but I haven't heard anything about them going up to like geostationary or anything, right?
No, nothing like that. This is very much akin. I mean, this is very much akin to Rocket Lab, right? Like 500 kilometer sun synchronous,
Right.
those types of things. You would definitely need a much larger kick stage or propellant volume for these to do geo missions.
And I mean, as Rocket Lab Rocket Lab has deep space missions, right? So there's a distinction there between some of these small sat launches that have different capabilities. Rocket Lab planning to go to the moon, plan to go to Venus at some point. I know Virgin Orbit has a huge interplanetary mission package that they're working on with an optional kick stage. So there are other small sat launchers that are trying to add that capability. Could you see Astra trying to do something similar once they get a little further into operational missions?
Yeah, although the interesting thing though is the payload capacity and what that volume is inside your fairing. Because when you start talking about adding a kick stage, right, you're going to have to change the fairing if you want to keep the same payload volume. But I'm also looking at this going, Rocket Lab can take about 500, what about 300, 400 kilograms or something to a 500 kilometer orbit. They just actually increased that payload capacity actually a little bit, and that's with the kick stage. And Rocket 3 can take a maximum of 150 kilograms to a 500 kilometer orbit. So I don't know, the rocket might not actually be designed for a kick stage, or they might have a completely different fairing or system in the work to accomplish that. Astra is one of those companies that, when they're ready to talk about what they're what they have in development, they'll talk about it, but they're not going to talk about it beforehand. Very much like Rocket Lab, where they were just like, surprise, we're advancing recovery by a mission.
Right, yeah.
With 2 weeks notice, yeah.
And on that note, before we move on to some other launches, we did have a question. Are there any other small sat launchers, looking at Astra, Virgin Orbit, etc., that are looking at recovering a booster? Because that right now, as far as I'm aware, the only small sat launcher looking at any sort of reuse is Rocket Lab, who's trying to not only curb their cost even more, even though small sat launchers are designed to be small and very cost efficient to produce, but Rocket Lab also looking at, if we recover a booster, that means we don't have to build one. So that saves our manufacturing times and things like that. Even if it's breaks even on cost wise. Are there any other small sat launchers like Astra that are looking at bringing that capability in and maybe giving them an edge over what could be a very crowded market?
Astra has not said anything about recovery, and I have not heard Virgin Orbit say anything about it. Jack?
Nope, I have not heard anything about any other companies besides Rocket Lab. I mean, that's kind of one of the things that makes me ask that demand question earlier is, if you're
Mhm.
a small sat launcher right now and you're just working on getting to orbit, and Rocket Lab is absolutely crushing it in like a steamroller sort of way, despite even having a failure this year. I mean, they
Mhm.
recovered pretty quickly from that, which is always awesome to see. Not a long, protracted investigation from like a super hard to fix something like that. So, I mean, yeah, if you're a small sat launcher right now, I not only want to know what's your plan on getting to orbit. I'm kind of curious about what's your plan on reusability. Not like you said,
Mhm.
not just to increase, or not just to decrease costs, but to increase cadence without having to increase your manufacturing. I mean, there's definitely something to be said for that. So I haven't heard anything about any other companies doing it, but I'm very curious. I'm sure it's something talked about at them, right? But matter of whether or not we get details on them anytime soon. Hopefully we do.
And Virgin Orbit
Yeah.
has an aspect of that, at least a little bit, because they have their air launcher, which is you could think of Cosmic Girl as a reusable first stage if you
Mhm.
really want to. But of course, that's a little bit different than recovering an entire rocket stage. But there's an element of that, and maybe that'll help bring costs down, or maybe it'll just be that performance boost from doing an air launch versus launch from the ground that'll give Virgin Orbit a sort of edge. But
Yeah.
so there are subtle differences between all these different small sat launchers.
Although I wonder, but I do wonder because of how far ahead Rocket Lab is, right? I mean, we talk about the small satellite launcher community separately from the larger satellite launcher community, but I mean, the parallels are identical with what you see, right? Like SpaceX came in as the big disrupting force to the larger crowd, and everyone's scrambling to catch up in some way with reusability
Right.
or innovation. And here's Rocket Lab that came along and said, yo, we're not waiting for you to tell us that you need demand for this. We know the demand is here. We're going to come into the market. And now everyone else who's starting to enter it, and Rocket Lab's already pricing it probably right to be competitive with Rocket Lab. And we know Rocket Lab's between 6 and 8 million a mission based on what's been said so far. Virgin orbits in that range as well. I would imagine Astra falls in that range as well for competitive purposes. But now here's Rocket Lab as these other two companies are just getting started going, and now we might be able to do it for half that.
Hmm.
That's incredible, and I wonder what effect that will have on the small satellite market, much as we're seeing the disruption that reusability of the Falcon 9s has caused to the larger orbital class market.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Moving on, we've got a lot of launches that I want to recap, but that's just the first part of our show right now. So I'm going to keep it moving, but love this discussion for Astra getting so close to orbit on their second try, and hopefully Rocket 3.3 will get that little extra bit and get its first payload into orbit. Looking forward to it. But a couple new memberships that have come through really quick. LMAO with a new membership, thanks. And Tim with a new membership as well. Thanks so much. We do appreciate it. And I'm going to go into some other launches. We go internationally now over to the Indian Space Research Organization, which of course had their second launch of the year with the PSLV rocket, the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, carrying the CMS-01 communications satellite. This is only their second launch of the year. They had a huge lull for almost the entire year due to the ongoing COVID pandemic. India hit very hard by that. But earlier this year, they did have their first launch. Was it a PSLV launch? That was their
It
first
was
launch, Chris?
indeed. Yep.
It was. So two PSLV launches, excuse me, today or this year for India, and both of them went off successfully. So all in all, despite the COVID implications, a pretty successful year to get these two missions off without a hitch. And they also have plenty of missions on the books for the next year as well. So India is still remaining a very active member of the international spaceflight community.
Mhm. And a backlog now because of a lot of the missions that weren't able to get up this year. But yeah, two PSLVs in the last 2 months of the year is a nice cadence for India, and hopefully they'll be able to continue that next year. Yeah, the satellite of note on this one though, just really quick, is actually a replacement for the GSAT 12 communications satellite, which has been up there for 9 years. With a lifetime of 7. So this one was a little bit late getting off the ground, but on its way to serve as that communications replacement.
Moving on to some other closer to home launches, we actually had at the very beginning of the week the launch of a SpaceX Falcon 9 with Sirius XM7, and I want to talk about the launch. Went pretty standard mission. The geostationary went off without a hitch. The satellite dropped off in its correct orbit. First stage landed on a drone ship. But I want to talk about what happened when it came back to Port Canaveral, because this is not the first time that something like this has happened. Doing
Leany
its best
McLeany.
Starship SN9 impersonation over here. Falcon 9 booster coming back and leaning a little bit. Chris, what's the deal and what's going on with these boosters? I mean, they look like they're straight when they land on the ship, and then when they
Yeah,
come back and they're leaning, and is this something that we should be worried about? I mean, what's
yeah.
the deal?
Yeah. So I'll answer that first, and then I'll go to my joke. So get ready. Yeah. No, there's really nothing to be worried about here. Yes, it's two kind of back to back that have come in like this. Honestly, the fact that this one's still on the deck and upright is a huge win. This one came through a massive weather system that also pushed across the Florida Peninsula earlier this week. Severe weather. We had at least one tornado in Central Florida from as a result of it as well. And this booster was coming back through it and went through extremely rough seas on its way back. So honestly, the fact that Octograbber kept hold of it and kept it to the deck, that little sucker has earned its keep on keeping two boosters secured to the deck during really rough weather returns. So no, not really anything to be super worried about. This is why they have Octograbber, specifically for that reason. And we don't, just like the previous booster, although Elon hasn't said about this one yet, but the previous one that came back with that, he said it wasn't a lot. I mean, there was no damage on the booster that would prevent its reflight or reuse. Just a couple things to do to the landing legs and the crush core system on it, and it wasn't going to be precluded from reflying. And they haven't really said anything about this one either, but I mean, we'll see what they do, but not a huge cause for concern. And now my joke. So Chris, our boss, our managing editor, tweeted that it was doing an impression of SN9, and I couldn't figure out like if the booster's voice was trolling SN9, going, "Look at me, I'm leaning," as it came back into port, or if it was going, "Take note, kid, this is how you do it."
Right. And hey, you have to remember that even if they come back in less than pristine condition, they're still coming back in better condition than any people not recovering their first stage boosters. And yeah, I think it's safe to say that this one's still going to fly again.
True.
We've got some questions regarding this. Has there been any Falcon NASA Space Hops? Is that a play on NASA Spaceflight? Nice name. Asking if have there been any Falcon 9 boosters that were successfully landed but never actually flown again? So maybe if they encountered some damage during landing that made them recovered but not really fit for reflight. Has that ever happened?
Oh yes. In the first largest round of that, as they were practicing landing, and the
Right.
first few boosters that actually successfully landed, they did not refly. In fact, the first one that successfully landed is sitting outside of their production facility in Hawthorne, in Los
Yes.
Angeles. A lot of the Block 3s and Block 4s that were only eligible for reflight up to one reflight after their
Right.
first reflight were also successfully landed and recovered, but could not be reflown again. In terms of the Block 5 boosters, there was a Falcon Heavy center core that
Mm-hmm.
successfully landed on the drone ship, but because this is where we say this isn't a cause for concern, but because the Falcon Heavy center core is different, Octograbber can't go grab it, and it ran into rough seas and tipped over on the barge, and only the bottom part of it made it back to Port Canaveral. One of them that launched the CRS-16 mission successfully landed in the water after it ditched into the Atlantic, coming back to land at Port Canaveral. And they didn't reuse that one, but I think all the other Block 5s that have landed have indeed been reused if they survived landing.
Or at
That
least
one
are being prepared.
that spiraled in was still one of the craziest that I can even remember. Especially
Yeah.
like if you were watching that one live, you could very immediately tell, like,
Mm-hmm.
I remember
Dawson,
watching and I was thinking, it's like, oh wow, that looks different than normal. But I was like, I'm not gonna. I was like, it was clearly different, but I didn't immediately click to, well, that's not coming back in one piece. And
yeah,
but I think once the landing burn started and we're like, that's not going towards the landing zone, it kind of clicked.
which was hilarious because so Dawson and I were on the causeway with that, filming
Right.
it for us, for filming it for his Twitch stream, which we were simulcasting on at that point, or broadcasting on at that point, and I mean, Doss had it. I mean, he had a rock solid track of that thing. And yeah, as soon as the entry burn was done, you saw it pitching up and down and up and down and spinning, even with your naked eye. Yeah, that was something. But then from our vantage point, it looked like it righted itself on the landing burn and was actually coming down on the pad. So if you go back and find that broadcast, when it lands, it looks like it lands perfectly on the pad and then just starts to go over, and you can hear Dawson and I go, no, 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 no. It disappears behind trees, and then you hear a pause, and then you hear, it didn't explode. It's in the water. And
Right.
yeah. That was a fun one. That
That
was a
was
fun
definitely
one.
interesting. And now SpaceX, of course, with today's landing of NROL-108, which of course we'll get to as the final launch of the week, but SpaceX has now broken their record for most consecutive Falcon 9 or Falcon booster landings. The previous record was 19, which they tied with SXM-7, and today was their 20th straight successful landing, a good streak to have going into 2021 and to continue there. Well, of course, we are looking at that SXM-7 booster in Port Canaveral via Fleet Cam, which Michael is showing us around, sitting on the transporter, hopefully headed back into the Space Force Station later today or within the near next couple days or so. And a good way to end the year for SpaceX, who, of course, also launched a record-breaking number of missions. But we'll recap that in just a second. I want to cover two more launches that happened this week. The first of which out of Russia again, but this one is actually the Arianespace Soyuz rocket, launching OneWeb's first mission since coming out of bankruptcy. 36 of OneWeb's internet satellites, of course, this is a big Starlink competitor, launching on a Soyuz rocket. And this is something interesting that happened. Chris, can you talk a little bit about this mission?
Yeah, so this was oh boy, what a long and winding and somewhat weird path to this launch. So yeah, shortly after OneWeb launched their third mission back in March, and we're talking just a few days after that one, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, going out of business. They were trying to find people to buy them. And in late June, the government of the United Kingdom, in cooperation with Burghardt Industries out of India. Hang on one second for me.
we getting the train, or is it cats?
Oh,
No, it's train. It's train. Why'd you mute it though? We could have heard it. It's kind of on the right
we could
passage.
it could have been a new spot on the bingo card, Chris.
It is, I think, a spot on the
Missed
bingo
opportunity.
Yeah, I was gonna say it probably is a spot on the bingo card already. Yes, the train. So the British government and Bahari Industries of India, which has an operational arm in the United Kingdom, bought them for $1 billion, $500 million each. This set off alarm bells within the British government that triggered investigations and inquiries into the purchase that are still ongoing, because the UK Space Agency and some of the ministers who were reviewing the details of the purchase proposal raised a lot of concerns and red flags about the purchase, and if it could be guaranteed, if the return on investment could be guaranteed, about the stability of the system, and also what the system would be used for. Some of the things that have been thrown out are using it as an alternative to Europe's Galileo global navigation and security constellation, which the UK lost lost access to when it left the European Union. There's a tricky part of that because that's not what the constellation is made for or designed to do. There was also some talk about using it for national security communications, but again, those plans are somewhat nebulous. And then, of course, OneWeb still wants to offer them on the commercial market for sales for regular home-based internet. But they're launching again. Exactly who the customer base is going to be or what the UK government's going to use them for, they don't know. But they're launching again. They're out of bankruptcy. The sale was formally approved in October here in the United States by the Federal Communications Commission. And so they lifted off this time from the Vostochny Cosmodrome in eastern Russia. This was the first Ariane flight out of Vostochny, and the first for OneWeb as well. There are up to 7 OneWeb flights planned for next year that will be split between Baikonur and Vostochny. But here's the really cool part of this mission, because who needs grid fins, landing legs, and a landing burn? That, my friends, is the core stage of the Soyuz that launched it intact after plummeting uncontrolled to the ground in Siberia.
Cool.
Russia. Gotta love them.
This is one of those differences where, because we've talked about the big one being the Chinese space program, right, which has several launch sites that launch over populated areas and can drop stages near populated and Chinese citizens, whereas Russia doesn't have an ocean to launch over for the most part. Most of their launch sites are fairly landlocked, at least depending on what inclination you go to, but they are surrounded by lots of very uninhabited Siberian deserts and things like this. So this stage, even though it landed on land, wasn't a danger to anyone. Russia makes sure that their downrange people are protected if there's anyone nearby. It's a very different thing than sort of Chinese landings or other countries which usually just launch over water to negate the entire issue. But yeah, I mean, this picture is just incredible. And sometimes we get these of just, yeah, this is a spent Soyuz rocket stage in the middle of Siberia.
Yeah, and I mean, it's humorous just because of how intact it is. I mean, like any object, it would probably stabilized, belly flopping and had a low enough terminal velocity and had vented its propellant tank so that it just survived when it hit the ground. But still, the fact that it didn't collapse in on itself is pretty impressive.
It doesn't even look crumpled or anything. It's just perfect. I wish we had sort of a wider shot of this without the people, just to get more of a rocket in its natural habitat or unnatural habitat.
Yes.
I like seeing, because remember, Soyuz does the hot staging, so you can see the very charred inner stage part, right, where the second stage was literally firing into it before it even separated, because that's how they start the second stage or the third stage, depending on who you ask.
That's also why it's sort of that grid structure there at the bottom, right? Is that why it's staged?
Yeah,
like
it's
that?
It's
a hot
what do they
stage,
call that?
So...
It's
a
lattice structure, right? I think is how they refer to it. So it's just a super random picture that Dmitry Rogozin tweeted out, I think, earlier today. It's like, oh, by the way, we found the core stage.
Yeah, well, and this is what, and it goes to the point that you were talking about, Thomas, too, because one thing I really appreciated about Rogozin's tweet, there was actually the one that preceded it, where he showed video of the recovery and security forces that had been out there enforcing and keeping the area safe, because they knew this is where it was going to come down, right? And to what you were saying, Thomas, this is a very, very important difference between Russia and how they launch over land versus how China launches over land, where China is just basically like, good luck, whoever's in the path of it. Sometimes they evacuate villages, but not usually. Versus Russia, which really does take care to be in the area and informing people of what's going to happen and trying to and enforcing a safety zone around the drop locations for these things. And for Soyuz missions that launch to the International Space Station, these forces stationed downrange are actually how they're able to grab the crew so quickly, after aborts. If like Soyuz MS-10, and hopefully we never have to have another one of those, but the same goes for when they're launching out of Baikonur as well, and out of Plesetsk.
Excellent. And we're gotten to the final launch of the week, which was, of course, this morning out of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. If I can find the right footage, hold on. There it is. Chris Gebhardt, you were down there at Kennedy Space Center for SpaceX's final launch of 2020, which, of course, so 26 launches from SpaceX, 25 of which were orbital and 25 of which were from Florida. Of course, Jack was at the one out of Vandenberg, and SpaceX has a couple out of Vandenberg planned for next year, right, Jack?
Oh yeah, I'm really excited for that. Of course, a return to Vandenberg operations for hopefully, on a consistent basis. But so you said 26 for the year?
26 launches, including the suborbital in-flight abort test, which Jack was also at, I remember. Curse the
Yeah.
cloud or whatever.
Curse
Don't have
of
to talk about sore
cloud.
subjects, but
that's their most ever in a year, or
that breaks their record. So 25 orbital flights for SpaceX in a year is a new record. And of course, SpaceX breaking all sorts of records this year, but not least of which was their launch gains for the year. And they're aiming for even more next year. They want to hit 48 launches in the year 2021, which is a hefty goal, even though they hit 25 orbital launches this year. We'll have to wait and see how close they get to that. So ending the year with a successful classified mission for the National Reconnaissance Office, and closing out the year with a return to launch site landing at Landing Zone 1, which I will now find a picture of. But
yeah, these are getting so few and far between that when they happen, they're just like, yes.
yes.
Yeah, there's, there, a lot of the times for these downrange landings on the drone ships, you watch it go and you can still you can hear it for a long time. Like you can hear the rocket for, still like 3 or 4 minutes after liftoff, and sometimes, and it's really cool. But then just to hear them and watch them come back is incredible, because you get when you watch from the press site, like I did today, you see it falling, you hear them call out that it's gone subsonic, and then you see the flame reignite, you see the legs deploy, you see it touch the ground, and then a couple seconds later you get the triple sonic boom from it, and then the roar of that single Merlin engine, that sustained like 30-second roar that happened in complete silence. I mean, just the disconnection of the sound from the event, it's so cool. And you watch these things hurtling back toward the ground, and it's really like just at the moment that you start to get nervous that the engine's not going to start,
right,
is boom, when you see that green flash of the T-tab, and boom, there's the engine. Yeah.
Even the leg deploy. The leg deploy is so late. Like if you're trying, like this is a fantastic photo from Steven here, but like it's so close to the ground and the legs aren't even out. Like if I was if I'm going to be a whiner for a second, and like as a photographer who's like, man, I want the photo to look how I have it in my head. Which, I mean, come on, you want the photo to look awesome, and this is an awesome photo. I'm not saying it's not, but point being, if I was going to like go in here and paint this photo exactly how I wanted it had I taken it, I would want the legs fully deployed by now. It would just look better. I don't know how to describe that better, I guess. But to your point, Chris, it's like it's crazy how last minute all of these operations are. Last second.
It's almost like I like to think of it with the disconnect between the visual and the sound aspect of it. It's like you get to experience the landing twice. You get to watch it, and then you get to hear it and feel it. And that's kind of cool. This is one of just a couple return to launch sites. Of course, the other one at Cape Canaveral was this same booster on the SAOCOM 1B mission, which was a polar launch from Florida. That was super cool. And then, of course, Jack got to see one of the other ones, because the one launch out of Vandenberg this year was also a return to launch site at Landing Zone 4, the Sentinel-6A mission. So there were a couple. Were there others earlier this year? CRS-20, I guess, would have been a return to launch site, right?
Yeah, but I don't believe CRS-20 did. I think it landed on the drone ship.
Can someone chat fact check us really quick?
Or maybe CRS-19.
I feel like 19 I thought was the weird one where they did the drone ship.
Somewhere, yeah. Where did
one of them was not, but anyway, return to launch sites, I'm hoping there's more of them because they're super cool to see. And the drone ship ones, while they're cool, you don't really get to see them in person. You got to experience them via. What was that, Michael? CRS-20 was a return to launch site. Okay, so I think
Okay.
CRS-19 was the weird
19
one that
was the
went
one that
drone ship
didn't, yeah.
instead. But yeah, so ending the year
Yeah.
with a successful launch and landing. The NRO did confirm a little bit ago that the launch was successful. Of course, it was all classified, so we didn't hear that during the official coverage, but that is now confirmed. SpaceX ending their year with a very successful mission.
It really
So,
is.
yeah.
RTLS is just the best possible type of landing. I mean, the drone ship landing is a completely different problem and an awesome problem in its own way to see solved. But an RTLS landing is just so insanely curvable. The fact that the booster just has to completely point retrograde and burn propellant into the way that it's just insane and awesome. And I will never ever get tired of the RTLS landings. And like you said, I hope there are more of them in the future. I mean, on the West Coast, as cool as much as I do love them, we don't have a drone ship right now, so all of our landings will have to be either RTLS or expendable Falcons. So
Yeah.
hopefully, lots more RTLSs because that will mean more Vandenberg launches. Hopefully, maybe correlation, not causation. Still, you get it.
Yeah. I do have a question for you, Jack, because I'm curious on one thing, if it's the same between the two systems, because everything is so last minute, like we were just talking about with the Falcon 9. Did you find that to be true with Starship as well?
Yeah, I mean, Starship seemed to be incredibly close to the ground when it finally fired up its engines and like did the flip. But I said it before, and I'll say it again. That flip maneuver, I mean, it looked chill. I don't have like a scientific or technical term for it. Really, it looked easy or like relatively low.
Not overly sporty.
Yeah, there you go. Not overly. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good way to put it, but I've long thought that based on like that one simulation video that SpaceX released way back, that maneuver looked kind of nuts, and it really in real life it looked surprisingly like, oh yeah, it just goes bloop and then it lands.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yes.
it definitely seemed to be very very last minute, but I mean, a plane has to get low to the ground to land, right? So a rocket has to get low to the ground to land, I guess, is how we can think about it.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
A couple questions here because I know SpaceX always draws in some questions. Here is a good one. So at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, there are landing zones 1 and 2. At Vandenberg, there is landing zone 4. Where the heck is landing zone 3? Why what's up with SpaceX can't count now? No, of course not. But there was plans for 3 landing zones at Cape Canaveral when Falcon Heavy was supposed to have all 3 boosters return to launch site. But in practice, it's not really practical when you have a core stage burning for so long and going so far downrange to bring it back and land on land. So I think the main reason is, well, there was going to be a landing zone 3, but we don't really need it because the center core of a Falcon Heavy, if it lands, is just going to be on a drone ship regardless.
Wait,
So you
wait.
don't.
LZ3 is that patch of the Atlantic that they landed right there and
Yes.
where it ditched.
Yes.
There you go. That counts. Maybe we'll just do that. Also, landing zone 4 has that coincides with Space Launch Complex 4,
Yes.
which is where that landing pad actually is. So I wonder if that's the real reason that they just skipped the 4 for that one. Maybe LZ3 will appear at someday. Maybe the landing zone at 39A for the Super Heavy booster can be named LZ3. I don't know.
Yeah, I think what just happened there when they realized they didn't really need the landing pad for the heavy core, and there was even we know they did a trade study on it, because Elon has even, and SpaceX has even kind of talked about the fact that if they did have a mission that required the heavy but still somehow permitted enough propellant to remain in that center core to fly back to the space center, they would just put one of the drone ships a few kilometers offshore,
Right, yeah.
and just have it land there, and that was by far the cheapest way to go about it. Yeah, so that's I think that's really what the decision boiled down to. And then just so you didn't randomly have an LZ3 at Launch Complex 4, they just said, all right, West Coast, the whole Launch Complex 4 is just going to get the 4 designation for simplicity.
And
SpaceX
here's a
and
question.
naming.
Oh, go ahead.
Yep.
And we have a question here about those landing zones because we saw in Boca Chica where Starship actually sustained some damage from blasting basically broken up concrete into the engine bay and actually caused some damage to the vehicle. Has that ever happened to a Falcon 9 or a Falcon Heavy booster landing on the landing zones? And if not, what do you think the difference is?
So two principal differences. So the landing zones at Cape Canaveral are not test facilities, and because of that, there's a certain standard that has to be adhered to that the Cape oversees and the range oversees and things like that. But the other main reason is that the Falcon 9's landing burn is only done by the center Merlin engine, so only one of those engines is reigniting. Whereas the Raptors are trying to not just ignite, but also get up to liftoff thrust and ramp up as high as they possibly can. And the Raptors are incredibly more powerful than the Falcon 9's Merlin 1D engines are on their first stage. So the fact that it was a test pad and doesn't necessarily have to have the same rigors as the landing pads and the landing zones at Cape Canaveral is, but also because Starship is going to have to land on surfaces without landing pads when it flies itself to other planets and things like that. So it's got to be able to handle that type of debris that's being kicked up into its engine section.
Thank you very much.
You were talking about an engineering study earlier, a couple minutes ago, right, Chris?
Oh yeah, for the drone ship, yeah.
Slightly off topic, but idea for an NSF weekly show, space industry engineering studies, where we just talk about different engineering studies every week, because there's so many interesting ones for so many different. Like there's like Vulcan Heavy and all kinds of crazy stuff. Like each week we talk about a different space industry engineering study. Anyways,
I like that actually. Yes.
When inspiration strikes, I gotta get that one out before I forget it. Anyways, moving on.
Yeah, that wraps up this week in launch news as well. So I'm going to go through some super chats before we cover some non-launch related news. And of course, we've got plenty of other things to talk about, especially the latest down from Boca Chica, so don't go anywhere. But we got some super chats and stuff to go through here. We got one here from Arthur who says, speaking of the season finale, this is our final NSF Live of 2020. Do you have any plans for updating the intro since a ton of stuff happened? Thanks a lot for constant coverage with unique views. Last month has been absolutely crazy. It has. And Jack, any thoughts on maybe updating that intro? Because by the way, Jack Beyer made the intro for NSF. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Jack, any thoughts on that maybe?
Yes.
There you go. I was hoping he'd draw it out a little bit, but no, he's just it's coming. It's coming.
No, it's a tough problem too, because I do think it needs updating, but I also think so many people, even myself, like when I see it, I get amped up and I'm like, woohoo, like we're gonna go live.
I think as long as the song stays the same, the video clips can be updated and it'll still have that same energy that we all like, I think.
There's also like certain video clips that I really don't want to change. Like for example, the SN1 pop at the very end, or is it the Mark 1 pop? I think it's the SN1 pop. The way that it fades with the vapor cloud into the smoky NSF logo, like I don't know, I love it. It just makes me very happy. So I do want to update it, but there's also clips like I can't get rid of Stratolaunch. Like I'm not going to take the Stratolaunch clip out. Should it be replaced? Maybe, arguably, like maybe I should, at a certain point, I should have one of our other editors take a pass at it, because I'm too sentimental with my edits for it. I don't know, but short answer, yes, it does. I think it does need updating. Probably for 2021, we'll have to start rolling with a new version with some different clips and the same audio, because I know everyone loves the music, which is really heartening. Is that a word? Because when you pick a track and it gets old, it's like, ah, darn it, like this music didn't have any staying power. But the track that we picked for the NSF Live intro, I think, has some staying power. So I'm glad for that. Glad everybody likes it.
I was gonna say, yeah, like I'm kind of in that same boat. Like it's like it's like when a TV show changes their opening title sequence and you're like, but why? I don't know. I like the previous one. Yeah, like, it's like change.
I think also what we need to do is, and by we I mean I, um, is just do a full length version, because we also have like a 3 minute or something like that version of the same track, not just 30
Oh yeah.
seconds. So
Yeah, that's true.
if we did just like a 3 minute like highlight reel, because I know people are always asking about the name of the track and where we got it from and how they can listen to it. So it's not really easy since it's from a stock music website, without like the audio watermark in it or whatever. So that's one of the many things on my to-do pile now that SN8 is done and SN9 is slightly delayed, and we have a little bit of a moment to go, okay, holidays, 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 and then back to work.
Yeah.
A couple more super chats that have come through. Dougal, a regular on the stream, says hashtag Team Jack. My Texas Tank Watcher craving is slightly better with NSF Live. Thank you so much for your support.
Thanks, Dougal.
Here is a good one here, a $50 super chat. Thank you so much, Bimmerjeezer. Thanks, NASASpaceflight, for a wonderful year of coverage. Will there ever be another Falcon Super Heavy flight? I think you might be conflating two different things, because there's Falcon Heavy and there's Super Heavy. Super Heavy is the Starship system booster that hasn't flown yet, and of course there will be many launches of that, but not quite yet. Falcon Heavy, the next launch of Falcon Heavy is scheduled for no earlier than next spring on a classified mission for the U.S. Space Force, and there's also a second one later next year. So yes, there are more Falcon Heavy missions coming, and we're looking forward to those next year.
Yeah, next year could potentially be year of the heavy. Oh, did I just coin a thing? I might have.
Uh-oh.
If next year we get a Delta Heavy from Vandenberg, we get we get 2 Falcon Heavies potentially, and maybe even the first Super Heavy booster down in Boca Chica, I think that would qualify as year of the heavy. But
Isn't
we'll
there
see.
isn't
We'll see
there
what
a
happens.
isn't there a Delta 4 Heavy from? Is 2021 the year the Cape skips its Delta 4 Heavy, or do
I
we
think
have one
so.
too?
I think there's only
Oh, I'm
one
not
Delta
sure.
Heavy, and it's Vandenberg.
Yes.
I could be mistaken, but I
Yes,
thought so.
yes, the Cape Canaveral skips 2021. Yeah.
But
Gotcha.
also, if Vulcan makes its target date for next year, Vulcan is also arguably a super heavy lift vehicle, and so yeah, year of the heavy. I'm calling it now. Year of the heavy. Let's do this.
And
Okay,
maybe with
I would be remiss if I did not point out maybe even SLS in there toward the end of the year.
Oh, thank
maybe
you.
it's
Thank
going to be
you.
really
Yes.
close.
Come on. Okay,
But
so
yes.
to make it actually year of the heavy, SLS has to squeak in like December 1st or something. Come on, SLS.
Yeah, which we'll get to SLS in a minute. The poor dear is struggling.
Well, a couple more super chats, and then we're going to move right along here. But Kylie Williams says, "Happy holidays! I've thoroughly enjoyed spending so much time with you all in 2020. Have learned so much from the team, and look forward to lots more in the new year. Thank you so much, everyone, for the kind words. We appreciate it." Future Martian 97 with the super chat just says, "Thanks for the amazing year of coverage. Again, thank you so much, Future Martian, a regular in the streams. We really do appreciate it." And also another thank you here from Jackie. Thank you so much for the whole NSF team. What an amazing year full of wonderful coverage. Thank you, everybody. We got some more super chats. I'm going to keep going through them, but I also want to get through some new news to cover. And I did see a question about this, so there's a small bit of news that we'll cover before going into some of our bigger ticket items. But this week, NASA made a small little announcement that doesn't have any immediate implications, but it's kind of big. NASA selected Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket to join the family of NASA's Launch Services Program vehicles. So basically, Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket, their orbital rocket that's coming up, is now eligible to be awarded NASA launch contracts. Now, this doesn't mean that they actually gave them any launch contracts yet. In fact, they didn't. But it is now eligible to be selected for those missions. And the question I saw earlier, and I don't know if I'll have it in the queue anymore because it was a little bit ago, but the question was, why did they do this if New Glenn hasn't reached orbit yet? And there are basically a couple different classifications. And Michael, if you can pull up my screen, I'll bring up the charts that have to do with this. But basically, the difference is there are different certification levels as far as what launchers can carry what kind of payloads. And the lowest priority NASA missions, the ones that are the lowest cost, aren't super urgent, things like that, they can be launched on vehicles on their debut flight. It's just a matter of how valuable that payload is to NASA and things, a bunch of different factors like that. And New Glenn will only be eligible for those class of missions until it at least flies one time. And there's some other factors that dictate how quickly the vehicle can be upgraded in its certification status. But initially, New Glenn is only capable of being awarded Class D payloads, which are the lowest tier of NASA payloads. After that, they can be upgraded to launch more complicated missions. And of course, New Glenn is important in that regard because Blue Origin's national team may want to use the New Glenn vehicle to launch their Human Landing System vehicle, which is a much higher priority payload for NASA, and things like that. So, to answer the question about that New Glenn announcement, that's kind of the deal. It'll only fly low priority missions initially, or at least only be eligible to be awarded those missions, and it's still competing with all of the SpaceX, ULA, and Northrop Grumman vehicles, Rocket Lab vehicles. But it is the newest member of the NASA launch vehicle family. So a bit of news to add to Blue Origin's resume as they prepare to make their first orbital attempts.
I'm definitely excited for the coming glut of Methalox engines and engine shots.
Absolutely, and between New Glenn, Vulcan, and the Starship system, absolutely.
Give me some blue
Okay,
mock diamonds. I'm in.
absolutely. So moving on to some other news as around the spaceflight world. Jack, you are the expert on this subject area. Our friends over in Mojave, Stratolaunch. What has Stratolaunch been up to this week, Jack?
A whole bunch of testing. They've been doing some engine runs. They've been doing some low speed. I say low speed, but this thing really got moving. I think it got up to like more than 70 knots or around 70 knots at one point. But yeah, they're doing some taxi testing and some engine testing, various other types of testing ahead of hopefully a second flight soon in the first first couple months of next year, something along that time frame. But it's so wonderful to see this honestly like marvel of the engineering world moving around under its own power. It's really great to see the rock, which is what the plane is called, ROC. The rock is doing a thing. It's doing some work. It is testing and doing what it was built to do. Well, doing part of its job of what it's built to do right now before it can get to launching hypersonic test vehicles. So I I was allowed on the tarmac by Stratolaunch, so shout out to them for being extra awesome to us, myself and NASA Spaceflight. And yeah, we got some really cool photos of the vehicle doing its thing. I mean, how can you not love this most Kerbal of aircraft? You can see that's the cockpit there on the left. That one is pressurized, but it's basically full of instrumentation and equipment. And I think the rest of that fuselage is unpressurized. And then if you go back one photo, there is the cockpit on the right, which is that's the one the crew is in. And you can see they left the door open because even though it's relatively cold out in Mojave right now, it's like in the 40s and 50s, which to me is cold. I'm sorry. I grew up in sunny places. Um, it gets hot in that cockpit, I'm sure. So they left the door open while they're doing testing, or maybe it's for safety purposes. I can't say, but yeah, just interesting to see the door and the crew in there doing their thing. I'm so excited to see this vehicle back moving again under its own power.
I mean, look at some of these photos, guys. This is just nuts to get a insanely close view of this insanely large vehicle, which is going to be doing what now? Hypersonic research? What's that all about?
Well, that's so originally, I think originally, Stratolaunch was supposed to be launching Falcon 5 Airs or Falcon
Right,
9 Airs
yeah.
or something like that. For it was a design study. Hey, we should really do that industry design study
Yeah,
show.
actually, we should.
Um,
Yeah.
it was a design study done in I think with SpaceX, and at a certain point, SpaceX pulled out, but Paul Allen and Stratolaunch continued on with the endeavor, and they were going to launch or they were going to build their own rockets. And I think at a certain point they pivoted to Pegasus rockets,
Hmm.
and now they have kind of moved away from Pegasus again and back to their own systems. But instead of orbital rockets right off the bat and like customer payloads and whatnot, they are launching their first designed rocket is going to be called Talon A, which I don't have a picture of because uh, yeah, don't have a picture of, but they are working on a suborbital. I don't even know necessarily what the height it's supposed to get up to, but basically it's a Mach 6 um, hypersonic research test bed. And you kind of think of if the X-37B is really what we have been told that it is, and it's not some kind of spooky space laser, which it's not that. If it's what they say it is, then it's just like a research test bed, so we can throw some stuff up in orbit for a year or two, test it out, and then bring it back and check it out and see what the effects of being in orbit did to that equipment. So it's kind of like that, an X-37B, but for hypersonic research, is my understanding. And I could be wrong. We're only going off of a few little bits of information that Stratolaunch has released so far, but suffice to say, we should be getting some more information as 2021 arrives and progresses. And I'm excited to see what Stratolaunch has in store, because hypersonics, if we're going to get faster than we currently have point-to-point travel, whether that's Starship, whether that's a Virgin Galactic style point-to-point type thing, or whether that's something else, we're going to have to do more research on this, on the hypersonic regime. And I'm glad to see that this is an area where we are expending resources again. It feels like, I'm not the authority on the subject or anything, but it feels like, we did so many X-15 flights, and we did so many, so much research in that realm at a certain period of time, especially I think in support of the space shuttle program. And then after a certain point, it's just like, okay, it's really hard or technologically impossible for various reasons or what have you, and kind of put it on the shelf. And it seems like, okay, no, let's take it off the shelf and let's do some serious work in the hypersonic regime now and see what we can achieve with modern materials and modern modeling and construction techniques. So it'll be interesting to see Talon A, which is that first hypersonic vehicle they're building, take shape. And yeah, I'm one, excited to see Stratolaunch fly again. That's going to be awesome. Two, I have been super excited to see it move under its own power again. And three, I am super extra turbo excited to see it fly carrying something in that massive wing box, because it's got a giant space to do work with and carry items into the air and launch them and drop them. So, this thing has been designed to do work. So we are hopefully closer to seeing it do work, and it's going to be awesome.
I know we're all looking forward to it, and I know we're all looking for the live streams, because that Virgin Galactic stream last week was super awesome, and Jack was out there doing that, and this will be that scaled up, and so I think we're all looking forward to seeing that unfold, and it's very exciting.
Yeah,
All
you
right,
got it. I mean, definitely
go ahead.
Mojave is the home of air launch, and if
Right.
whatever arguments for or against air launch you have heard or want to present, I submit that air launch is cool.
There
So,
you go.
so more of it is good in my book.
All right, and moving on to one of the more popular topics on this channel. I guess some people come to this channel for these shiny rockets down in Boca Chica, so they were going to talk about that just a little bit, because we got plenty of news for the super heavy lifters that are coming up here, and we got tons of questions in chat. So honestly, I am just going to run through some questions about the starships and everything about that, and I think we'll kind of get the latest news that way. So the latest being, what about Starship SN9? We know that it got some damage. It tipped over in the high bay, and one of its fins was badly damaged. Is SN9 a write-off? Is SN9 going to fly? Chris, what do you think?
Well, it's not a write-off, based on some road closures and stuff like that. Yeah, not a write-off, which I guess isn't really surprising. That we'd been talking earlier about. I guess we'd been talking earlier, right, about what it was going to take if it could fly again, and the points we were making sort of last week when they were still doing the recovery operations for it after it tipped, right? We were saying that, well, they got to get it righted first, and they've got to get in and actually have a chance to look at it, because if it's just superficial stuff or things that they can fix fairly easily, then it could most likely still fly. But it was really going to depend on exactly how it fell and where it made contact, and how. But we know that the road closures have sort of been moving all over the place for transportation operations. And right now, we believe that the road closures toward the end of the month are to actually haul it out. Oh, well, here we go. Boca Chica road closures. There we go. Yes. over the you can see all the ones that are canceled and still scheduled, but we believe that one of those toward the end of the month is actually to take and to take SC. I almost fell. Y'all have a bingo card about me dropping things. Do you have one about me dropping myself?
Technically that would count, I think.
Right. But yes, we believe the ones toward the end of the month are the road closures to bring it out to the launch pad and the launch stand, or move it around. But that's at least what I know. Jack, Thomas, anything to add to that?
Well, Jack, you were down there most recently. What do you think? You going to be there for SN9?
Yeah, if I can safely attend with COVID-wise and whatnot, I definitely want to see that same flight profile again, which is, I think, what we are expecting for SN9. Sort of how 5 and 6 did the same profiles, and they both did 150-meter hops. I'm pretty sure we're expecting serial number 9 to sort of do the same thing serial number 8 did, and that was the craziest thing that I've ever seen in my life. So yeah, I will, if SN9 flies, which seems like it will. Hopefully the damage isn't too bad. I hope to see that again. I mean, it's only going to get crazier from here, right?
Absolutely, and I think we're all looking forward to more Starship testing. That'll be another big ticket item to watch going into 2021. But yeah, as far as the latest on Starship SN9, I think the plan is still definitely for that vehicle to fly, because they removed one of the damaged fins that was a result of that tip, and they've actually replaced it with a brand new one, which they wouldn't have done if the vehicle wasn't going to actually fly. So clearly they're repairing the parts that were affected, but the vehicle still looks like they're going to roll it out and give it its launch campaign to fly again, that same profile that SN9 flew. So we're definitely all looking forward to that, and I think that is still the plan.
Either that or they're hauling it out for Starhopper to have a talk with it.
A pep talk or like a disciplinary talk? Like, what are you doing? Falling over in the high bay?
I really do like to personify them, the starships, perhaps a little bit too much. And I definitely always imagine Starhopper, being the first one of these test vehicles to have ever flown, sort of giving them all a pep talk as they arrive at the launch site. Like, all right. It's like, he's like, Starhopper's like the coach. He's like, you're going to do great. You're going to fly to your apogee. You're going to go up to your apogee. You're going to descend. You're going to land. You're going to stick the landing. You're going to be beautiful. Like, thanks, Starhopper. Like, you do good work.
And we got a bunch of questions in the queue.
Now I really want like a cartoon sequence of that pep talk that you just gave, Jack, of like Starhopper talking to a starship. Yeah.
We got a bunch of questions in the queue. Some of them are about Starship, some of them aren't, but I'm just going to go through them, and feel free. Again, if you have questions, feel free to tag us in chat, and we're going to love to answer them. We've got tons of Starship visuals to just kind of show in the background while we answer your questions. This one is somewhat...
orbital mount, right?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yep.
That's the orbital mount, correct?
Yes, this is the orbital launch site where a super heavy booster will eventually find itself, and we're looking forward to that. But here's a question kind of related to Starship, although it's more to deal with some of the orbital systems. Dan, thank you for your support. Why did worldwide launches decline from 90 to 2005 and then increase since then? And how many do you predict next year? And then finally, related to that, why have there been a larger percentage of failures this year versus recent years? So I think I could speak to that failure number pretty accurately, because we talked earlier today about Rocket Lab had a launch failure. Astra had technically 2 launch failures, although you could very much argue that Astra's most recent flight was successful. It just didn't succeed at reaching orbit, but that wasn't the primary goal. But still technically a launch failure for statistics purposes. But there were a couple of those failures of these brand new vehicles that were making their debut. Virgin Orbit's Launcher 1 debut was this year, which of course failed. And again, that's not really to be unexpected, because these are brand new launch systems, and it's very rare that a brand new rocket reaches orbit on its first try. One could argue that the Starship SN9 test was a failure because it didn't land in one piece, but it was overwhelmingly successful as far as accomplishing test objectives. So it kind of depends on how you look at the statistics and things like that. But that's kind of why the failure numbers are actually higher this year, is because a lot of new vehicles are making their debuts. And as a result, you have a lot of first flights that don't quite go to plan, and the teams will learn from that. And on their second attempt, they have a much better chance of reaching orbit successfully. So to that end, there's that. But I want to hand this over to Chris for that first part of the question. We saw way more launches this year than we have, in many years prior, and we can see that trend continue to increase. Not least of which due to our friends over at SpaceX. What do you take of this increasing global launch cadence between the U.S., China, new companies like SpaceX and Rocket Lab. What's to make of all that?
I think there are a couple of important ones. One is the reduction in launch costs that we've seen the Falcon 9 sort of propagate throughout the launch market, right? We've seen, in response to that, we've seen ULA lower their prices for the Atlas V. We've seen Arianespace come up with the dual passenger option for the Ariane 5. We see the Soyuz doing ride shares as well now. And we see the proliferation, especially with Rocket Lab in the small satellite market. The hugest increase this year has obviously been SpaceX with Starlink, and the rapid sequence that they've been able to get those off the ground with. But ultimately, if you start lowering the cost that it takes to get there, well, suddenly that gives companies and governments the ability to actually afford the launch vehicle, which in many cases is a prohibitively expensive thing to some nations' desires, right? And we've seen with that decrease, we've seen Bangladesh and Bulgaria both become spacefaring nations with their own satellites in orbit because of that launch cost reduction, and what they're able to do with that. Specifically in the 90s, there was also a huge shift toward pouring as much resources as possible into the International Space Station. That was an incredibly expensive venture, and one that not only took a lot of capital outlay to achieve, but one that took a lot of time and a lot of other resources and personnel, not just from NASA, but from Canada, the European Space Agency, from Russia, and from Japan. And when you start allocating all of those massive resources into that, right, other things were just simply going to have to fall by the wayside. And I think we're seeing the rebalance and the resurgence of that, and I think you're also seeing that lesson carried forward into Artemis to sort of ensure that that decline in other industries and other areas of the sector doesn't necessarily happen again.
Thank you for that. And we're certainly enjoying that increased launch cadence here when we're not just viewing the launches, but also covering them, because there's a lot of exciting missions going on. And I think there's some really good points. So thank you for that. Moving on with some more super chats here. We got one from Parker here saying, "Happy launch, Miss." Thank you so much for your kind words, and saying thank you, NSF, for bringing it to us every single day. So thank you for that. Here we got some feedback on changing the NSF theme. Paul Has Plain says Babylon 5 changed the theme song every season, so there's precedent there, Jack.
It's just then the pressure is on to come up with a theme that everyone likes as much as the original, because I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, I don't like the theme, right? So, I mean, then whatever the successor would be, it would have to be really good. Like, well, it could be done though. I mean, we workshopped the original in our Discord, and everyone was kind of like, "Yeah, this one slaps." So, so we went with it. So maybe we could find another one, but no promises one way or another yet.
We've also got a super chat here from Arthur that says, "To the NSF Live Study Analysis Fund." So the NSF Live spin-off show that talks about trade studies, I guess, has got a fund now. Chris G, write that down for the NSF budget. Thanks very much.
There we go.
We also got one from Michael. "Thank you for all of your great live streams and videos this year. Can't wait to see everything happening next year. Neither can I. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for the support." Here's a quick question here from Doug Cross. Say, can you add some detail to what Jim B tweeted? Of course, Jim Bridenstine tweeted about the NASA Authorization Act yesterday. Basically, if you didn't see this, the administrator of NASA did come out just announcing that the U.S. Senate unanimously passed a NASA Authorization Act, which basically just allocates the funding for the next year of NASA operations, which offered a lot of support for the Artemis program, especially the human landing system development, the moon lander development. So that's all that Bridenstine was tweeting about, and of course that's great news. We want to see those big flagship programs be developed, and I just want to add my thanks to Jim Bridenstine for his amazing work this year and throughout this past administration, because it's work like his that have gotten those kinds of deliveries for NASA. Getting Congress behind support for the Artemis program and things like that is not an easy feat. And Bridenstine did very well. I don't know if Chris or Jack, do you want to add your thoughts on the upcoming end to Bridenstine's tenure at NASA? Jack, why don't you go first?
I mean, I think by all accounts, a very successful and very well liked for that reason NASA administrator. And you know, a large administration, a large organization, especially a bureaucracy like NASA, I think of it in my head a lot of times like a 2-mile long freight train or like a fully loaded super oil tanker or something, right? Like it's not going to turn on a dime. It's not going to just immediately about face and go 180 degrees in the opposite direction. There's a certain amount of institutional momentum with a large organization like that. And yet, in Bridenstine's time, he has been able to effect a large amount of change, and the oil tanker is turning, and it's turning towards Party Island, and that's a good thing. And that's the best way I can probably put it. Chris,
Yeah,
at least well, if not Party Island, like less taxpayer money being set on Fire Island. How about that?
I'll just bring up this SLS tweet really quick. Nope, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, actually, that's what I almost made that joke too. Almost made that joke. I'm gonna miss him. His tenure at the agency was short. In my opinion, it was too short. I get that he wants to move on. I still wish he would stay. His work getting Congress on board with things is truly commendable in many areas, but at the same point, he was caught between a rock and a hard place. And I think he threaded the needle as well as in the best way possible right now between the emerging commercial market that is a force to be reckoned with in many different ways, and the more traditional way of doing launch operations and everything. That is not an easy ask for someone to navigate, especially in a political position. And whether you like it or not, that is what the NASA administrator position is. It is a political position. And he definitely did a wonderful job with that. He did a great job of getting, I think, of overseeing the final elements of the commercial crew program and getting that up and running. And if there is no other thing that he is remembered for in later on, as other administrators come and go, I really, really hope the thing he's most remembered for is standing up in that final year and saying, if Starship works, we can't afford to not have been involved on the ground floor, because it's revolutionary if it works. And if there is nothing else people remember him for or like him for, I don't know why you wouldn't like him, but if you don't, I hope we're all at least very happy on that, because that, from the administrator, is a huge acknowledgement of what the potential future holds for NASA.
Agree.
Like I said, wish he was staying. Really wish he was staying.
But even though he's not, full speed ahead to Party Island from here on out.
Yes, and that should be something that we say. The Artemis is not going away just because there's a new presidential administration coming in. No administration wants to be the administration that cancels the moon at this point. Right. I mean, that's not going to happen. The larger question, I think, that does remain is, what does the Artemis program look like in 4 years? Because I think the program will still be around. Mm-hmm. I'm not necessarily sure the SLS will still be around. Maybe not. Don't know. Not making a firm decision on that yet. But I think that's the bigger question. What does the Artemis program look like 4 years from now? Not, is it going away? Because it's not.
Right.
It's absolutely
and I think I agree with you there. I've got a couple more super chats coming through. Jen's with a super chat. Thank you so much for your support. We got a good. Oh, here is a great question about Starship development. Super chat question. Maybe a stupid question. No stupid questions. Don't worry. But why start on a serial number 17, Starship SN17, when SN9 hasn't been tested yet? What's the logic behind that, Jack?
Because for the parts that don't like that, you're not worried about failing because they don't need to be tested because they're known good. You have a leg up in time because you've already made them.
Hmm.
It does seem kind
And
of
to be fair, this
counterintuitive,
is. Mhm.
but I mean, I need to go back and like read more about Saturn V development, but I feel like in a lot of ways previous development programs for large projects, whether it's a bomber or a rocket or what have you, they're building parts as they're designing parts, as they're testing parts, as they like. There's two different types of development styles, and I don't remember the types, but there's one where it's like you get everything perfect and you test all the subcomponents, and then you put it together into one perfect, neat, perfect thing. And then there's the different style where it's like you're just going to build it and you're just going to build them and you put all the pieces together and you test it, and if it fails, you find out what failed and you fix that and you fix that and you fix that and you just repeat that process. And clearly, the latter is what SpaceX is doing here.
Yeah, I was going to say, I believe we just call that what everyone else does versus what SpaceX does in
Right,
this
yeah.
industry. Yeah.
And it's worth noting because we're seeing the difference in that. And I keep bringing up this tweet because sometimes it's easy to make a joke about it, but it's also a legitimate difference because we're seeing how Starship development goes, where it's like break things fast, learn from it, and keep building things, versus the test everything exhaustively and come out with your first kind of finished product being much more thoroughly tested and kind of closer to perfection, if you will. But we're seeing, if we look over at the other super heavy lift rocket that's being developed in the United States, the Space Launch System, they're
Mhm.
bringing their first core stage down to Stennis. They've been trying to get this first wet dress rehearsal underway, and they now scrubbed it twice.
Mhm.
So obviously, these are minor setbacks. They will get through them, and we're still expecting that green run to occur this year. Of course, you don't get closer to perfection. You get closer to perfection, but that doesn't mean you don't find small things. But it's worth noting that how many Starship prototypes have we seen go through Boca Chica over this year?
Right. Well, I think the larger point to that, though, because yes, I agree with you, right? I mean, you can talk about the number of starships that have gone through Boca Chica today, and or not today. Geez, one day we'll be able to say that the number of starships that have gone through Boca Chica this year, and you could rightly say, well, and while all of those have been happening, the same core stage has been sitting on its test stand in Stennis, which is exactly true. But here's the main difference between those two test regimes, right? And especially when you compare NASA to SpaceX. SpaceX is a private company. They can do whatever they want with their money. NASA is not a private company. Can you imagine if a government taxpayer funded initiative went out and just said, well, we're just going to launch it and see what happens. And if it blows up, who cares? We'll learn
Right.
and we'll go back. No, 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 no. Oh my Lord, you would lose funding so quickly across the aisle in the United States. Absolutely not. NASA can't do the same things that SpaceX is doing because of the difference in privatization versus public projects. That's a huge, huge part of that understanding. Now, you can ask, now that is a valid comparison, though, to Blue Origin and to ULA, which are not government agencies and could do test campaigns like SpaceX is doing, but opt not to and opt to go to the let's make a perfect product right out of the gate, even if it takes us a long time to do it.
All right, and that's gonna. Oh,
Anyway,
go
and
ahead.
yes, but yes, to the actual question you asked, Thomas. Sorry, the second scrub for the wet dress rehearsal for the core stage of SLS was caused by a heater issue this time, whereas a week and a half ago it was a cooling issue that got them, and propellant loading did not start on either the liquid oxygen or the liquid hydrogen side. So another aborted test. Very unclear right now when they'll be able to try again, if they'll even be able to or want to try again before the end of the year, or if this just pushes everything back even more for SLS. We really don't know. We'll have to wait for a more formal NASA announcement on that one.
And just a quick contrast to that, in like 30 seconds here, we started off this year in the Starship world in Boca Chica with like header tank tests, test tank tests, and in February, in the end of February, we had serial number 1 stacking. So extrapolate in your head, basically a year of development, SN1 back in February to now SN8 flying to 12.5 kilometers at the end of the year. it's going to be insane to see the rate of progress on Starship in 2021, and hopefully we do see some progress there on SLS's side.
Absolutely. And that is actually going to do it for our NSF live show for this week. We had so much news to cover. I hope we covered at least the top level of all of that we could. If you had a question that we did not answer, our Twitter handles are right below us here on the screen. Feel free to send those questions to us or at NASASpaceflight, the main Twitter account, so that we can hopefully answer your questions over there. We tried to answer as many as we could. But thank you so much for enjoying a wonderful year of spaceflight in 2020. And I want to give a special thank you to everyone who supports these streams with their super chats and their memberships, especially these launch directors and flight engineers on the screen. These people go above and beyond for their support of the NASA Spaceflight channel, and I really do appreciate each and every one of you. We all do. But as far as 2020 goes, this is actually going to be us signing off. This is our last live stream of the year. We are going to go ahead, sign off for the year. We will join you again with more Boca Chica coverage, more launch coverage, more NSF live episodes in the year of 2021. But until next time, myself is Thomas Burghardt. I'm joined by Chris Gebhardt. Chris, thanks for joining us.
As always.
And Jack Beyer over on my other side. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jack.
Yeah, no problem. If you like the amount of Starship progress this year, you probably also like the amount of progress on our YouTube channel. And that's in no small part thanks to all of our members and all of our super chatters and everybody that's watching us and tells their friends about it. And just wait, we got a whole bunch more cool stuff in store for 2021, in the same way that a lot more cool stuff coming up for Starship. There's a lot more cool stuff coming up with our channel. So thanks for watching, everybody.
Actually, this is the last NSF live of the year, but there might be more live streams if they do stuff with Starship, correct?
Oh, that's true.
This
You
is
know
just our
what?
last weekly
I keep
show.
doing that thing where I keep forgetting SpaceX could just roll out a Starship any day. So
Yeah.
forget the fact that I said last NSF live. If a Starship rolls out, we'll always be live for that. So no worries there. But stay tuned for the channel. Stay tuned to NASASpaceflight.com for our news coverage. And until next time, this is Thomas Burghardt and the NSF team signing off. See you guys next time.
Chamber pressure looks good. Following up. Roger, roll with planet. Water towers fly! Flight downside of speed off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.